Well, an estimated 3,500 UK holidaymakers have spent the weekend returning home from Tunisia after a Foreign Office warning that another terror attack there was highly likely. It's 2 weeks since 38 people, including 30 Britons, were murdered in that horrific beach shooting. You'll remember that at first the Foreign Office chose not to warn against all travel to Tunisia, but critics say this latest decision will not only harm the country's economy, but it's playing into the hands of the terrorists. Well, Nabila Ramdani is a journalist and commentator specialising in the Middle East and North African affairs. This was unexpected, wasn't it? And I mean, the Foreign Office is clearly not telling us why it's reached this decision, but I guess it has to put the safety of UK citizens before everything else, doesn't it?
Well, absolutely, but I still believe that its decision is very much a short-sighted, alarmist reaction. Not only will it cost the Tunisian economy millions, but just as importantly, it will be yet another green light to future terrorists. And the whole point of this attack was to terrify Westerners into staying away from a developing democracy which desperately needs the help and indeed the support of the international community. But by giving that kind of warning, the British government is effectively destroying a country by calling for all tourists to leave. I think it's a victory for the terrorists.
Destroying a country, that's a very big claim. Why do you think that?
I think the British government is effectively allowing low-rent terror to win. It's effectively saying that one sociopath with an automatic gun bought on the black market can destroy a country's entire tourist industry. There is absolutely no doubt that the beach attack was terrifying and indeed barbaric, but so are similar attacks in all kinds of countries, including France and indeed the US. America, for example, has lost 30 people a day to gun violence in 2013. That is practically the equivalent of a Tunisia beach attack every day. But if the government was to announce that there are so many multiple shootings in the USA that people shouldn't holiday there would be an outcry. And yet that's exactly what they're doing about Tunisia. Britain itself has gone through some terrible terrorist periods over the last few decades, not least of all the IRA bombing campaigns in cities such as London and Manchester. Now, just imagine how Britain would have reacted to another country telling its citizens not to visit during that period. I think the principle is, or the reality is, that all kinds of people are targeted in terrorist attacks around the world.
Yeah, but there is a difference, isn't there? The IRA or the shootings in America aren't targeting tourists, whereas the two attacks we've had in Tunisia, the beach shooting and the museum attack, were clearly targeting tourists.
Well, I think that the point about terror attack is that they can target anybody, from politicians to soldiers to ordinary civilians, and that was the case in Tunisia. And we've heard, from the Foreign Office, in fact, Philip Hammond said that the UK government had no specific or indeed imminent intelligence, only saying that further attacks were highly likely or indeed could happen. So you could apply that reasoning to practically any country in the world, not least of all the UK, whose current security status is, just like Tunisia, considered at high risk terrorist risk. So they enjoy the same status at the moment.
And presumably, I mean, I haven't seen figures on this, but we know that some of the holidaymakers who've been evacuated would have been people who would have arrived in Tunisia after the shooting, people who had made their own decision. Some people cancelled, some people decided to go. So in a sense, the British government must somehow say that they know something that those holidaymakers didn't know when they reached their adult decisions and decided to go.
Well, I also believe that when they travel abroad, holidaymakers have an idea that the region can be dangerous, and they factor that in, and they can make a decision. British tourists have suffered massively in the attack in Tunisia, and it is one which has certainly captured the public imagination in an entirely negative way. That said, tourist destinations can and indeed do recover from this kind of attacks. You only have to see how many people are still travelling to Paris since the January Charlie Hebdo attacks. And I do think that there's every indication that people are prepared to factor the risk of terrorist attack into a holiday without it preventing them from going.
We know the Tunisian government has taken a number of measures after the attack to try and ensure security. What more can they do, though, given that the Foreign Office advice seems so vague in terms of what they're worried about?
Well, absolutely. And the Prime Minister of Tunisia has in fact called on the British government to help Tunisia in securing the country and making sure that, not only Tunisia is safe, but also visitors are safe. They haven't, neither the British government nor the Tunisian government have been able to say, exactly how that attack happened in the first place. And what seems to be absolutely clear is that Rezgi, the gunman, had no criminal record. He was described by everybody, including his friends and neighbours, as somebody who's normal. There was no evidence presented of him travelling abroad for combat. The security service had very little interest in him before. He's thought to be self-radicalised rather than a member of a wider cell. And in that respect, the autopsy even revealed that his body was full of cocaine, for example. And in that respect, he's very much a type of lone wolf gunman. And it's very hard for any country to be immune from that kind of attack.
Nabila, thank you. Nabila Ramdani is a journalist and commentator.